the first thing, and I'm going to assume that their inability to do this is because we haven't used an effective instructional process to teach them how to do that. Now, the first part may sort of surprise you. The first thing we got to figure out is what is their dominant side. And the way in which we do that is I would take the spoon. Do you have a spoon available here, Chris? Okay, if you can maybe give me that spoon. I don't have a table here, but what I do is I put the spoon on the table and I put it at midline.
Okay.
And I'll watch which arm the person uses to reach out with the spoon. And if they're not motivated to use the spoon, I could put, some object that they want to eat, that might be a finger food, maybe some carrot or celery or something like that, or even candy on the table. And I'm going to watch what dominant side they have. It's really important. Everybody tends to, there's some people obviously who are ambidextrous, but most people have a dominant side. And I really want to support that person in eating independently with their dominant side. And I don't know if you're aware, Chris, but people also have a dominant eye and they have a dominant foot more often than not. If you want to know what dominant eye the person has, left or right, you can take like a tube that is used for a paper towel tube, or toilet paper tube, and hand it to the person. Ask them to look through the tube. And instinctively, people will put the tube over their dominant eye. If you want to know whether somebody is left-footed dominant or right-footed dominant, from the time a person starts walking, people almost instinctively will start out with their dominant foot. Most people are dominant all on one side. So either you're left dominant or right dominant. People with intellectual disabilities have a higher probability of what is called mixed dominance, so that they may be right-eyed, left-handed, and right-footed, which makes this whole thing on coordination, right, a little bit more difficult. So what are we going to do? What I want to do, and I'm going to come over here behind you here, Chris, and helping this person eat more independently. Sure. This is the assist position. You don't want to be in front because that is the do for feeding position. I want you to be able to look at your food. That's why I'm going to stand behind you. And I'm going to assume, for purposes of this discussion, that you are left dominant. Okay. I'm going to start over here, okay? And in my mind, I'm sort of thinking about, and you may have seen this on TV, or you may have actually been in such a laboratory, where they have these research centers where they're dealing with radiation or viruses, and they have this really thick glass, and on one side there's these robotic arms that the researcher is using, and for every movement that the researcher makes, there is a precise and alternative move on the other side of the glass, so it moves precisely the way the researcher moves to be able to move the vials, the canisters, and so forth. Well, that's sort of the way I'm thinking here about this. Now, the other thing is I've really got to assess you to know whether you need an adaptive spoon or not, right? Is that just because I put this in your hand, you may have, now we're working on the assumption that the person does not have any muscular neurological issues that impair movement, such as pincer grasp, that's thumb and forefinger, or palmar grasp. If I see that the person does, I would consult an occupational therapist to be able to find out what adaptive spoon they might need. Sometimes people need what is called a build-up handled spoon because their grasp is very limited because they can't engage in a complete closure or a pincer grasp. You'll also notice, and this is just sort of an aside thing here, that when you eat, your wrist bends, your wrist flexes. And we do that unconsciously. Sometimes when people have cerebral palsy, their wrist will not flex, okay? It is stiff. And thus they have difficulty in getting the spoon in their mouth. That's when we provide them an adaptive spoon that is either called right bent or left bent. And the reason the spoon is bent, and it would be bent this way, because even though you couldn't flex your wrist to get it that way, the spoon automatically will go that way. And sometimes, and I'm just using all these as an example because this is part of what we would have to assess if the person was having some physical difficulty. And sometimes people have these palsy type of responses for a variety of reasons. I actually find I'm confronted with that sometimes, like at lunch, if I drink like 8 cups of coffee, and I'm drinking too much coffee and I'm trying to drink the spoon. And that sometimes can be minimized with a weighted wristband or a weighted spoon. So I'm just sharing that with you generally. So with this individual, the other thing that we want to do is see how difficult it is to go that full distance. In other words, how far do we have to move that spoon? Would it be easier if we got a plate riser? Now, I'm going to let you hold on to that for a minute and just indicate that we can go online to various catalogs and purchase some of these items. I would recommend that usually you get an occupational therapist to assess and evaluate the person if they're available. But these things can be purchased without being prescriptive if licensing and the rules allow that. There's a catalog called the Preston Catalog, for an example, where many of these things can be purchased online. So if the person needs a plate riser, they sell these, it almost looks like a TV tray, if you will, and they have little legs on them so that the person's plate can go on the tray. So you've now decreased the distance. Now, if somebody doesn't want to pay for one of those plate risers, the other thing that we can do is get a couple telephone books and just put a placemat on the telephone books that can bring it up. And sometimes what we'll do is get like a milk crate. You've seen those milk crates, right? And you can just saw it, just saw that milk crate to the right height, and then you can put a piece of plywood over the top, and that will do. I like the milk crate because they can go into the dishwasher and clean up. So there's a number of strategies if we don't want to buy a plate riser that will help us. So I'm now standing behind the person, and my thinking is I want to diminish my control. Initially, since they cannot eat it independently, I am going to control their movements by having my hand over their hand. Okay? And at any time I'm feeling that they're continuing the movement toward their mouth, I'm releasing my fingers so that they can continue it to their mouth, right? Usually when somebody puts a spoon in their mouth, as soon as the food leaves the spoon, they will tend to take the spoon out of their mouth. I seldom have to remove the spoon from somebody's mouth. They usually take it down this far. They may not know where they're going with it, and we'll go ahead and continue on down. Now, at the same time while I'm doing this, in terms of this intermittent hold and control, right? I'm also thinking in a linear fashion. I want to be able to bring my hand up your arm, because the farther I am on your arm, the less control I'm exercising over your hand. So if I can get to the point where I'm doing this, my hand is in the open position, and then that will help you as well, okay? The more motivated the person is to do that, the more likely we're going to be successful. Now, one way in which we obviously can motivate the person is by doing this as much as possible with foods they really like. Is that generally they might be willing to eat a lot of things that they're not especially interested in, as we all are, as long as I'm going to be feeding them. But if I want them to really be motivated, then why don't we try this with some foods they really like to use? The other thing is, I probably would not do this for the whole meal. And that's a really important point. When I start this out, let's say that meal time and eating everything they have before them is going to take 15 minutes. I probably initially would not spend any more than 3 or 4 minutes doing this.
Oh.
Yep, right. Because it's pretty tough on that person, right? And then the rest of the time I would revert back. I would stop at that point and then continue. And the next time I would make it a little bit longer, so that you're sort of increasing the amount of time, because you're asking them to move their arms in a way they've never moved it before. And some of these folks have a pretty high level of lethargy, and the muscle tone may not be that good. So we want to sort of build up their endurance and comfort with it. I don't want this to feel unpleasant at all for that individual. The other thing I want to do is be highly celebratory. And even if the person has significant intellectual limitations, people know when you're celebratory. In an appropriate adult manner. Hey, that was fantastic. When I stop, boy, that's great. You did a fantastic job. That was really good. You show it in your face. You show it in the enthusiasm of what they were eating. So that's basically the strategy. Obviously, there's many other factors and influences depending upon the needs of that person. I mean, some folks who we support may even take the spoon and bite down on it. Okay, if we see that, then the modification needs to be a plastic rubber-coated spoon to minimize any damage to their teeth. I mean, there's a lot of variance associated with that.